How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you. It's great to be
We're
here.
we're excited to have you, product marketing guru here. I'd love to first start with you giving a little bit of your background before we dive right in.
Yeah, that's a good place to start, probably. So I've been a product marketing manager for about 5 or 6 years now, mostly in the human capital management space, doing B2B software. And aside from that, I've done a lot of other product type related things. I'm currently one of the founders of a small company that's in the startup phase, trying to issue a product to the consumer market, which will be a really fun new change from B2C in my background. And so that is in part with my education, which I'm in the middle of a MBA program at UCLA, and we'll be finishing that up soon.
All right, juggling all of the balls.
Yes.
Well, that is so awesome. We wanted to talk to you because we are working towards helping our listeners launch a business if they are not already an entrepreneur and have desires or aspirations to be an entrepreneur, or want a second business.
Yep.
To help them launch a business in 3 days. A lot of that is just on the ground marketing work, but there's a lot of things that have to happen before that. And with your experience in product marketing and understanding a market and buyers, I really wanted to kind of dive into the sorts of things you feel like you need to lay the groundwork for in order to do those things.
Yeah. That's a really good question, and I think that's an important place to start. So first, I think is to understand who your audience is. Who are you going to speak to, not just with your marketing and not just with trying to entice somebody to buy, but ultimately the product. It sounds cliche or a little bit made up, but a product is kind of having a conversation with the market. It evolves and changes and iterates over time based on the needs and tastes of a market. And so in a number of different ways, being an entrepreneur is just doing that, like figuring out, bless you, figuring out how to, understanding who your audience is and how to better engage them. And so the first place that I have started in the various products that I have helped to launch is to start, don't even begin with whatever you think the solution is in your mind, because that tends to bias the way that you look at the market, or even have somebody else do it for you, which is kind of what I do, because product, of course, is always spinning through solutions in their head. And so it's trying to build a profile, understanding a demographic as well as you can. I like to get down to the level of knowing what cars they like to drive, and if they like dogs or cats, that sort of profile, and building out a persona of who you're trying to really speak to. And that helps you to really understand and have more empathy for ultimately who your customer is. And if you have a really good connection, I think that's the key starting point of a really successful business.
Yes, and we've talked about this concept in a few conversations. For me, this really resonates to me because it is so easy for me to be like, but everybody should want what I'm saying, exactly. What I'm selling. Like, it's that valuable. It's that good.
I think it's actually more dangerous if you feel like you are the target demographic, instead of if you're trying to speak to somebody else. Because
interesting.
I mean, because it's easy for you to say like, oh, all my friends are this way. All of my friends agree that this is the most important thing for a product. But when you get up into the 200 level of a respondent survey, you may find the opposite. That's pretty good statistical accuracy. And if your demographic doesn't agree that X, Y, and Z are the top 3 things, but you do, you have to, again, it comes to that empathy piece of set aside yourself and what you think needs to be a thing for what the market has told you, what your buyers have told you needs to be a thing. And so, no, you, I think, have a symptom that's not uncommon to a lot of people who really strongly believe in something. So that's the challenge, is that you have to pick your battles almost of like, do I really think that biodegradable packaging is really critical?
Oh my gosh, you're talking to my soul.
See, I know to some extent the importance of it, and it can be, but the ultimate thing is that you have to play a back and forth. Like, if I do really want X feature, it may slow me down getting to market, or it may be more expensive and cut into my margins. And so you kind of have to pick your battles. And if you have to trade off against what the number one value of your persona is, you may be making the wrong decision in ultimately what your buyer is going to buy. And if it's not that, if you truly believe it's something else, you may need to go look for a different segment in the market. And so you may have to pivot quite a few times, which I know that people listening today will automatically know that entrepreneurs have to do that frequently. And that may have to be a strategy that someone uses.
Yeah. It is really interesting how there are kind of two sides to this coin, for me at least, where it's really easy to think that the majority of people think the way you think. And I think in an election year, that's particularly a good example, where it's really easy to think, oh, they must think the same way and support the same candidate. And then when you find out that they don't, even though they might share some other opinions with you, it's almost like, what?
Exactly. Well, and another example that's related to that is D&I. Diversity and inclusion, which I work on quite a bit, that especially people in generations approach D&I differently. And so somebody preaching about a certain thing, you have to start where somebody is to bring them along to where you are. And sometimes, we just assume somebody is with us in our camp, even though they have the same demographics, they look the same, they act the same, they talk the same, at least we think to us. And so, it especially in an election year, exposes that we all think very, very differently.
Yes, and we're not very good at reading people as we think. And so it's so crucial to get that data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, because we want to think that people share the same values as we do, or understand things at the same level that we might. And so with that, not only comes understanding who they are and what the market need is, but also understanding what they already know and how to either utilize that information or how you need to educate them when it comes to whatever your product or offering may be.
Yeah. And that's very different for different entrepreneurs, because you may have something that is iterating on something that's already available in the market. Just the business plan or the business model just wasn't very successful in executing something. And so your task in educating a buyer may be very lightweight. It's just, look, we just removed this barrier that sucked about this thing that you were using previously, and now you're off to the races and have all this new value. But it may be something completely new. It may be something that buyers look at and they think, I have no idea about how to use this. And the important thing there is not only education, but also they have to see themselves in how you are marketing your product, which can be really difficult. So Google Glass is a great example of this. It's a great technology that was really smart, but then the problem was that they put it in the hands of tech people. And so who bought the technology? Tech people. And so average Joe Schmoes like you and me looked at it and said, I don't know if this is a solution for me, because you couldn't see yourself in the product. And so it's not just education, especially if you have something new or novel, it's also helping the buyer to see their problems in the solution that you are trying to propose.
So then how many different buyers do you feel like you can have while still remaining effective, or different buyer personas?
So ultimately, I believe for any use case for a product and how you're marketing it, there's one. And so that's the part where it's really weird for people to get their mind around this. And even for people who've been in business for 10 or 15 years, the place where I have to struggle a lot to help educate them is what a target persona and segment looks like. Does this mean that you're only selling to one sliver of person? No. This person is where you believe, this is the person who you think will pay the most for the solution that you're offering. And that's the person that you really want to dedicate a lot of resources to speak to, because theoretically you're going to get the better ROI. But there's bleed over effect. So other people are going to hear that message. Other people are going to see the value of your solution and they will buy it as well. But you're hoping that you've done your homework right. So the person who you're targeting will be coming back, be a fierce advocate, be a promoter of what you're doing. And that's ultimately the value of a target persona. So if you split that, and I talked about use case, for instance, because a product can be used across multiple use cases. However, you have to remember is that you're now splitting your resources across different markets at the same time. So what you may want to consider instead is just fire down one cannon at one persona of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to sell to. And then eventually, after that product becomes established, open up a second persona. That's the value and the great multiplying effect of having a product that has a lot of overlap. But the problem is that you're so tempted to, try and make multiple things happen across multiple markets, but you only have one budget. And so you have to utilize that budget with where you think the best ROI will be. And that should be your target market.
Yeah. Nail and scale.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly the bottom line.
Yeah, seriously. So in order to help you establish that first persona, you gave some like anecdotal examples about whether they like dogs or cats or whatever. What other ways do you recommend about collecting that data and that information you need to create that persona?
So another one that's great that I've done with this startup that I talked about is we did a survey that got a huge amount of respondents, which we were very excited about.
Okay.
Yes.
And can you do that on a budget?
Yes, 100%. So we built ours out of Google Survey.
Cool.
And so it's a free service that doesn't have any cap on respondents. The functionality is not like what you get with the Qualtrics or something else.
Yeah.
You may have to do a little bit more legwork to find a diverse sample size, because that's the trick, is that if you or your partner send this out to your network, guess what you're going to hear? Things that you already hear a lot.
Yep.
And so trying to get it out beyond that may cost something. So you may have to...
So purchasing a panel.
Yep, you may have to purchase a panel depending on what the type of research is that you need. Sometimes it's enough to understand some of the things that maybe you don't talk about a lot. Like you don't ask people, how often do you use CBD or consume alcohol? Like those are things that don't come up regularly in conversation, so it's hard to get a feel for. So that may be a question that's very applicable to a sample size that's really close to your network. But there may be things that are broader than that. There may be things that are very unique because I'm white. And so I hate to say it, but a lot of my friends are predominantly white. So what happens when I'm trying to approach a diverse audience, and what does that look like? That may be the place where I need to broaden my horizons, spend a little money, and get some sampling that helps to reflect that.
So I don't know if you've read The Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates.
I have not read that one, no.
But I seriously considered naming our daughter Melinda because she's the queen.
Amazing, yes.
No, I do really love her and the Gates Foundation. But in the book, she talks mostly about women's issues. But she gave this example of this Black woman who had an idea for a company that or product that was based in Black hair. Their hair is very different than my hair.
Yep.
And she proposed the business idea to a group of white men. And they're like, there's no market need for this. And when in fact they were wrong. There was a lot of market need, but they didn't have that connection to the part of the demographic of the market that would appeal to. And just to your point, how important it is to get that, to not rely just on your friends and family to help you to find that.
Yeah.
And I love, so one thing I do want to talk about, maybe this is because of just my personal experience and my bias or understanding around this, but I started off, my career at Qualtrics. And I remember I was like, this junior employee fresh out of college. And we sent Qualtrics surveys internally all the time. And
for sure that got to be a little cumbersome. It's like, oh great, another Qualtrics survey I need to fill out.
Well, yeah, and anyway, I had built out this survey and I'd gotten a few people to review it, and like last minute I changed something about one question. And I worked within the sales organization at the time, and sales can be really brutal. And one of the sales leaders approached me afterwards and said, Casey, that one of your questions is really leading. I was like, what? And so I want to talk maybe a little bit about that to help people avoid the same embarrassment or that particular embarrassment I went through of like, how do you structure your questions in such a way so that you're getting the information you need to act upon? And maybe actually we start there first by saying, what is it that you need to know and then build your survey or your questions?
So I have a leader in my organization who has introduced a really great concept that I've taken to heart, known as the beginner's mind. It's a concept in Buddhism that you essentially need to approach problems, which is what entrepreneurship is. You're just solving a giant Rubik's Cube, one square at a time, one question at a time. And the thing you need to know is you don't know anything. You have no idea about what your solution actually is, what the problem in the market is, who you're actually talking to, and you need to start there. And it sounds really tedious, and you know that you're smarter than that. But if you're going to get this right, if you're going to find an actual really good product market match, which is very difficult to do, you have to start with a blank slate and pretend like you know nothing. And so it's really helpful. There's so many resources online, and even in the survey that I built, and I've built hundreds of surveys before, I went online just to check my best practices, and it's easy to do, like customer research survey questions, and that will come up with all the right things, because we take surveys all the time, and we just say, okay, great, what is your gender? You know, more appropriately phrase, what's your gender identity? And it's usually just male or female, or prefer not to disclose, which you're missing a whole segment that's 4% of the population, where you really need to put, I do not identify, or I'm non-binary. And the same as with other categories as well, is that you are Caucasian, but somebody else uses a different term than you may call a population in order to identify themselves. Latino versus Hispanic is another great one. So it's important to take best practices from people who actually do this sort of research for a living. And so take a second just to really research and search what's the right way to form a question. And the second thing that's really tempting, because I think the entrepreneurs love the fact that they can put their voice into a business, is a survey is not the time to put your voice into a business. Like when we were doing our surveys, my partners really wanted to put in something that was really cute, and like, like trying to be dodgy, like a dodgy option that made people laugh. And the problem is it totally, just like you, would lead the audience. And so I basically said, if you want to keep this in, we're throwing out the question, because it's a waste of our time and it's a waste of our respondents' time. Yep. And so you're absolutely right that it seems sterile, it seems cool, but ultimately that's the best to gather the data, because somebody ultimately at the end of the day may not read a question the same way you do.
Totally. Well, and even to that point, I just sent a survey for a project I'm working on, and we did not, like, nothing about the survey was branded or identified with our company.
And sometimes that's important. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. And then sometimes there's a place for brand as well. Right. And so you're right that in some cases that's a bad thing.
Voice of customer, things that are specific to your like current business, I think keeping brand is great.
Yeah.
If it has something to do with, so for example, we were sending a survey for pricing and bundling. And if it has anything to do with like comparing to a competitor, I think it is always better to leave your brand off.
Yep. And I think that's a really great point, and something that anytime you're doing research, you have to ask yourself, am I asking in any sort of way for somebody to identify with my product? Yeah. And if the answer is no, then don't put your survey or your logo, whatever the name of your product is, you don't need it. And it potentially could be a biasing outcome, because especially if you're doing friends and family, they of course want to make you feel really good, even though they're anonymized with 100 other people in a survey. And so you could get a lot of those respondents back and ultimately lead you down a rabbit hole that doesn't have any result for you, which is worse than getting nice fuzzies from your friends.
Yeah, seriously. One other thing that I just wanted to touch on is how when we talk about purchasing a panel, if that is the way people decide to go, or if they decide to crowdsource and put it on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, keep in mind, to your point, that if you do that, you're probably just getting your network and not a truly diverse sample.
Yeah. But so it's key. The last point to that one is that it's key to make sure that you're understanding the demographics of who you're researching upfront. And so if you get a sample that is heavily biased in a way that is not true, for instance, like you get 65, 70% female versus 30% male, which we know does not exist on our planet, then it's important to note that as you're interpreting the results. That doesn't necessarily mean throw out all the data, but it just means that, yeah, you're skewed in certain ways. And so therefore I need to ask further questions about the things in my survey.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
go ahead.
no. That was a very good call out. But with that, I was just going to say, it's important to understand all of the tools at your fingertips. And I'd love to hear, especially if we're really budget sensitive early on and don't have a ton of capital to invest in this, but we're trying to be smart so that we make sure that this is a totally valid business option. There are, and I'd love to hear your experience with Google surveys, particularly because it's probably one of the most affordable ways to go about doing this. There are ways to have back-end data. Like when you talk about purchasing a panel, you can communicate what aspects of certain things you might need for that panel, industry, gender, whatever, right? And so then don't include those in the survey because you can tie, I'm pretty sure you can, depending on how anonymous you end up making it or not. But you can tie those together with it, and then it just saves your respondents from survey fatigue, which everybody loves.
As you know from your time at Qualtrics, that's a thing. Yes, absolutely. And I think ultimately it comes down to, you have to have a list of hypotheses to start. That's you're going to be best friends with hypotheses as an entrepreneur, because there will be questions that you need to understand. And it's, to your point, it may be important what industry somebody works in. It may be important what income category they're in. It may be important what gender, and it may not. And so you don't want to just throw stuff at a wall because you would just end up with a huge survey. But you ultimately have to sit down and say, what is the pathway between what my idea is now and an audience buying that up in bulk? Like they can't get enough. And there are a series of milestones, and then from those milestones, questions that are important to get to those milestones in terms of hypotheses. And you have to formulate a research plan around each one of those. And so that should be leading what your survey is. So keep some things in mind, like to understand the demographics of who's talking to you, but then underneath that, what are the things that do make an impact in how that audience connects with your brand or your product, and then ask those questions.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just a good reminder, because I don't feel like maybe we stuck on this very long, but just that establishing what it is you're wanting to know beforehand, before writing it. And even like you think, I'm going to be collecting data, thinking that long term in advance of like, when it comes to picking out data, okay, again, what are you wanting to know from the data? And then from there, okay, what do I want to know from the data? Then what do I need to know from my respondents? And it's kind of a backwards process.
It 100% is. And it's hard because you're trying to project yourself along a pathway that may twist and turn a million times before you finally get to market. And so you may be asking your questions to yourself a lot. And the important thing, though, as you're doing that, is that you need to keep in mind that there are a number of different channels to understand those questions. And some of them are best with just a survey to understand the audience, but then sometimes they may need to have already experienced and understood your product. And then from there, you're asking a number of different types of questions, either in survey or qualitatively, because the one other thing that can be really dangerous in trying to find product market fit is to hear what you think the problem is. And then once you say it and it's like, oh my gosh, of course this is the problem, and then just go run off and make a solution. And the problem is that you, again, may not understand the problem the same way that your buyer is. And so you need to ask more questions about, okay, so why do you think this way? Why is this a problem? What is the root? What caused you to do this? What prevented you from doing that? And sometimes you can only get so far in doing quantitative data before you actually need to talk to people.
Yeah, so would you say like the differentiator between the two is maybe like a multi-select question is qualitative data, open-ended is quantitative?
Yeah, and that's the important thing to note too, is that you should have a mix of both. At the end of all of my product surveys that I send out, I always have a question that says, is there anything else that I need to understand about your product experience today? And there could be something that I just had in my blind spot, and you always have to be mindful of that blind spot that I'm hoping, praying that my buyer will come and tell me so that I can make some adjustment or change or need in order to really find something that maximizes the value that I can deliver to somebody. So yeah, so there's that. And then interview questions and interviewing it feels awkward, especially in our day and age where we all hate even picking up the telephone to have a conversation. But if you just ask people, hey, can I talk to you for 10 minutes about this thing? I noticed that thing about what you do, in order to understand more, that can be invaluable. And we shouldn't be afraid to dive into that.
Yeah. So curiosity, and this is me who like, I'm pretty risk averse. And so like, I want to know budget wise, what am I committing to when I'm doing this? Not just my time. How much would you say it would cost to do something like this, even on a budget, scrappily, the way that you said it can be done? And I mean, in that is something that we haven't talked about, that is probably good best practices, and that is in those qualitative interviews this is just me, so I'd love your thoughts, but to send a thank you afterwards and understanding that, including that in your budget.
Yeah. So it's important to level set a little bit about entrepreneurism, that we, especially in America, I think, have this vision drilled into us that like this is the golden pathway to something amazing.
This is the American dream. This is what the American dream has evolved to.
And the thing is it's fraught with failure. And that's fine. And it's not so much, it's the cliche quote, it's like, it's not so much if you failed, it's what you do after your failure. But it's true. And the other thing that's important is that you are doing stuff as an entrepreneur that people typically don't. And that's the fact that you can be an entrepreneur. If everyone was executing on ideas that were really good, there would be no more ideas left. And so it truly takes like a level of gumption to go do things that seem counterintuitive. Like I listened to a podcast about Airbnb, and they set up this whole system. They set up this website. They thought they knew exactly how people wanted to interact. And then they went to New York, where a lot of their bookings were, and they actually walked through somebody setting up their bookings, seeing what the pictures were that they put on the site, what the process was for somebody to actually book a night there. And they realized a whole bunch of stuff that was counterintuitive to how the buyer, how the user actually wanted to use the platform. And that's when they had a light bulb moment. And that's when Airbnb took off.
Well, and even before that, they realized that this exchange of money between two strangers to stay a night in your house was extremely really awkward.
Yeah. And while that seems intuitive to you, because again, like
we've done it already though, right? We've used Airbnbs.
But to you, it may not seem awkward because you've done it before. And so you forget that that's weird to somebody else. And so it's the curse of knowledge a little bit, where it's like, oh no, like I've done this a million times and it should be fine for everyone else. They just need to learn. No, they do not. It's just weird, and you need to like fix it so you can alleviate that problem. But it ultimately comes down to, just like really diving in and understanding and doing things that are not scalable is ultimately the last thing. And you have to answer those questions to then figure out a business model that is scalable. And sometimes the only way to do it is to spend money in ways that don't seem like has a good ROI. But as long as it results in something that helps you to clarify what either is or is not a part of your future business plan, that's the value that you're trying to achieve right now.
Right, which gives you a greater chance of success.
Exactly.
But just out of curiosity, if you had to assign a dollar amount range to what someone might spend to do this process.
Yeah. So ultimately, I don't think that anyone expects like a $20 gift card. Luckily, I have product that I can send to somebody as a reward after I refine it to the point that people really want to consume it. But even just a thank you card or note or an email is really critical. Finding somebody to interview, at least for me, hasn't been a challenge. And I think the way that is alleviated is asking for referrals at the end. Is there anyone else that you know that I should talk to?
So you're saying doing that is a way to avoid the cost of a panel, just asking for referrals?
Yeah, potentially. And let's use LinkedIn what it's finally what's supposed to be used for, which is connecting people instead of being sold to all the time.
Seriously.
And so make connections, hit up friends that you haven't talked to in a while, and just say, hey, like, I want to learn something about what you're doing, and see where you get to. And you're going to get a lot of no's, but you'll get a lot of yeses from people who you're surprised about. Like the chief marketing strategy officer took a good 30 minutes to talk about her entrepreneurship experience with me. And she's incredibly busy. And so, but her valuable insight has helped to really change the way that we think about how we're executing. And so you ultimately just kind of have to take that shot for somebody who you think really has some knowledge that you could use and monetize in the future.
Yeah, I love that. So once you get that quantitative and qualitative data, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that the important thing is that you have to establish, so there's different phases that you're thinking about in terms of how you're using data over time. So for the beginning, you're understanding your audience, and that formulates how you're developing a product. And so you're putting in the things that you hear from your audience that they really care about and they really need, and eliminating as much as you can, or making trade-offs against the things that they don't care about. And then after you formulated this product, I think this is really the place where it becomes important, is that you just need to get that product out into the market as quickly as you can. We can simulate, we can do user tests, we can do everything that we possibly think is really smart for us to do to gather more data, but there is no amount of gathering that you can do that replaces out in the wild data collection, gathering, and understanding of how people are using your product. And so after you've formulated what could be called an MVP, and what I would define as an MVP is you have fundamental parts of your product, and they have an experience for each one of those. For the ones that we measure, we have 4. And so what we do is we send out the product, and we either are doing in-person interviews where possible, and if not, just surveys. And we're asking, hey, from what you experienced, what was your reaction, or how much did you like X, Y, Z, and A? And then over time, as we're iterating through the product, we're monitoring what those 4 things are until we're maximizing. We're pivoting the product a little bit by a little bit. We're iterating until finally we get to the level that we think we've maxed out at. And then from there, you may have a product that is prime time, is ready to scale, put really big marketing dollars, really big scale behind it. But it's important to set in place some sort of data collection that allows you to understand your progress as you're making decisions over time. Because,
so,
yeah, go
short answer. Once you've collected qualitative and quantitative data, go get more qualitative and quantitative data.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And as a giant data nerd, of course I'm going to say this, but it's ultimately the only way that you really know. Like, everyone talks about a gut and an intuition, and you sometimes may be right, but statistically, if you're going by your gut, you're probably wrong.
Or if you're doing it in a silo or a vacuum, it's not going to reach its full potential. And I love that maybe it's just like a circle that's climbing upstairs.
Yeah.
Where
that's ultimately it, yeah.
The bottom is collect data, the top is
collect more data to
produce
hopefully get
something.
You more. Yep.
You produce something, you go up to the next step, collect data on what that production was, collect more data.
Because the next step after you get sort of a product together, and of course this is rough, this is going to look different for everyone, but once you get that MVP in that product that you can really sell, now the question is, how much demand is there for this optimized value that you can deliver? And so that's your next phase of data, because if you're going to scale, guess what? You need more dollars. And so you probably have to tell a story of what you've developed to your friends and family who are going to hopefully give you money, or to a venture capitalist or an angel investor. And what they want to know is, what's your velocity? What is driving the potential growth that investor hopefully wants to see? And so your next phase is to see, I presented this product to 200 people and 20 people bit on my bait. And so I probably need to improve the value. I need to take it back to the drawing board. But if you get 180, congratulations, you are off to the races with a gangbuster product. And so, yeah, you get used to data and get used to really loving data, because it will help you to actually get the value that you want out of your business.
Yeah, I mean, Econ 101, right? Supply and demand.
Exactly. And you just have to juice that demand as much as you can.
Well, and then it's also understanding your total addressable market, which I think sometimes can be totally inflated.
Yeah.
where you like are like, oh man, I've got like $7 billion of a market that I can, and it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. But like truly understanding, give yourself like a grain of salt to understand, okay, there is a market, it's big.
Yeah.
But also like being okay if it's not like astronomical.
Yeah.
Because if it's astronomical, I feel like it goes back to that first point we were talking about where you're not pursuing one or two buyer personas. You're trying to get the whole pie, and then you're not going to resonate with one buyer at all, and then you're going to fall flat.
Yeah. Well, let's imagine Facebook. Let's imagine Facebook with the platform as is today wanted to launch and charge users up front, like a $10.99 per year fee. Facebook would look completely different than it does today. And so if you have an amazing product that doesn't match with your business model, congratulations. You're just as dead in the water as you didn't have either. And so you may get into the market. And that's the reason why you have to get to market as quickly as you can with an MVP, is because there's no way to look at the TAM. Like there are X number of females that are between the ages of 25 and 40. Great. That data is good to guide, but it's garbage when it actually comes to creating a business model and a financial model that will help to actually create growth. And so you need to understand that and what the demand actually is. And again, the only way to do it is by being in market. And then you have to figure out, do I need to change my price? Do I have to figure out how to make this revenue more recurring? Do I need to go back to the drawing board and try and figure out somebody else who's going to pay for this for the user to use this? There's lots of other things. And so, yeah, TAM is important. It helps to tell the story about what you're trying to do. But ultimately, you have to project penetration and demand in a market. And the only way to do it is to put it out there.
Right. And there's a lot to be said for being first.
Yes.
But not just first, because if I'm remembering correctly, the Zune was first before the iPod.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference there too, like having a good balance of like being quick, but making sure like everything that we just talked about, making sure your understanding of that is clear, and even like your messaging to that buyer is resonating. I don't know, I should go back and look at like old Zune marketing or something and see like, or watch video essays about why people felt like it failed.
100%. It's a combination, and ultimately what you're doing is you're just building a huge network as an entrepreneur, and it requires understanding a lot from all these pieces that are coming together that you have to manage. That can be really hard. There are so many products that are like that. There was a MySpace before there was a Facebook. There was Palm Pilot before there was an iPhone. There were BlackBerry. There was even a Palm Pilot before the BlackBerry. And so there's so many products that we don't know about, but are basically the same concept. But, I still think about Steve Jobs standing up on stage and saying, you've got a phone, you've got a iPod, and you've got a calculator. Imagine buying all these separately. Guess what? You don't have to. It all is in this one little bucket. And then I think that's the moment everyone's minds were like, oh my gosh, yes. But if you think about all the work that went into perfecting that buyer pitch, that pitch to like make it so simple for us to understand, because we haven't seen that vision of the future. Your buyers will not see the vision of the future that you are seeing, but that's no excuse. You can't blame your buyer for not buying from you. You have to figure out how you can articulate the story better so that it's dead simple, easy to understand and go, because that's part of it. As terrible as that is to say, that some terrific ideas with amazing backing, with an amazing gangbuster management buildup, didn't understand, again, back to our original point, figure out how to really connect with a market, to have a conversation with the market, both with their marketing and sales, but also with the product.
Yes, 100%. So I think it's that time.
Yeah.
How would you summarize your 3 takeaways?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first is data. Get your qualitative data, get your quantitative data. The second, related closely to that, is start with a beginner's mindset that you just don't know. You think you know, you don't know. And if you approach the market and you
with
understand any assumptions, it's probably going to kill you in the end. So just get rid of them right now.
Yes.
And then the lastly is just get something into market, get it as close as in the wild as you possibly can have, people pulling out wallets to pay you, whatever that looks like, get as close to that as possible, and then monitor with, again, more data to understand what's happening, and so that you can make decisions to optimize your value.
Wash, rinse, repeat.
Exactly. And there you go. Build a business in 3 days.
There you go. Done. Awesome. Well, thank you, Ike.
No, it was my pleasure. It was great to talk to you today.
You too. Thanks for listening to that episode of We've Connected. Make sure to hit subscribe down below so you get notified of any time we add a new episode. We'll catch you next time.